Welcome everyone. It's a delight to see you all in real life, in high definition, 3D, and for those of you who've had to deal with my internet connection, a lot less stuttery, so that's always progress. Let's get started. We last held an in-person event like this in 2019, in this room, and we were planning the 2021 when COVID hit. Whilst it's great to be back, the world has completely changed. And there's been a lot said on that change. So today, we don't want to look back. We've all done enough of that. We want to look forward. Because the last 2 years has been a period of transformation. Our industry was put under more immediate pressure than at any other point in living memory. And in response to this, business and people innovated and changed. This includes CACI. In our world, we're playing with new data, new ways of delivery, and today, new presenters. Running the show is going to be Hannah Smith and Charlotte King, who work in our owner and occupier teams respectively. We will have about 45 minutes from them, and then following their presentation, we're going to be handing over to a panel to hear their thoughts. After the panel, we'd like to invite you guys to all to join us for some drinks in the reception area outside. Today, it's all about the city. This is because cities encapsulate all that there is about us. They're the melting pots of the rich and the poor, of cultures, ethnicities, languages and religions. They are simultaneously destinations and hyper-convenient. They have workers, residents and tourists. They have sub-centres and pockets of interest, local neighbourhoods, urban villages, suburbs, retail parks and regional malls. Cities are a microcosm of society, and they afford us the perfect lens to understand what the future holds and how we must shape the built environment to reflect it. They're where innovation happens, and they're where many of the trends that shape society are forged. The people in this room represent the forces that help shape that space. From the stores, the restaurants, the public realm, the homes and the offices we all spend our lives in. By understanding what they mean to consumers now and in the future, we can create better spaces, places that people value, engage and spend money in. To inform our understanding of how people will engage in that space now and in the future, we're going to be calling upon some CACI exclusive consumer research, some transactional spend data, mobile geolocation data, Acorn, retail footprint, paycheck, and all the other data, insight and skills we have at our disposal. So, without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Hannah and Charlotte to lead us on a journey to the future of the cities.
Thanks, Alex. So we've reimagined what the future city is going to look like. So to do this, we're going to use a city that we've designed. So welcome to CACI. So we have a business district, a suburbia, we've got a retail park, an old town, we've got a mall, we've got flats, leisure, green space. And as we move through today, we're going to explore how each of these elements come together to create a whole greater than the sum of their parts. Creating this space needs a lot of careful thought and consideration from a landlord and occupier point of view. So we need to be asking questions of this space, such as how does a developer optimise the space for its audience, be that residential, be it office, be it retail? How does a retailer or leisure operator maximise the efficiency of its unit and create something memorable? And how do you demonstrate to all stakeholders that your plans benefit all? Well, to answer these complicated questions, we've adopted a framework. So what we have here is our city in the centre, what we do within our CACI, so we shop, we live, we work, we socialise, we work again, which are all things that we need to do in the places that we inhabit. So around these, we've got our core principles, which are sustainability, connectivity and inclusivity. So these are the core pillars which really underpin the physical fabric of where we are, and they need to be right if our city of the future is going to work. So all of these things flow into each other, and if you improve one thing, in theory, the rest will follow. So if you can achieve these things, then you achieve the most important thing of all when building a space, which is desirability. So somewhere that people actually want to be. But I'm conscious I've just thrown loads of buzzwords at you, so what do we mean by all of these words?
So everyone thinks it's only the young who care about sustainability, but that's just not true. Everybody cares. The young are arguably more vocal, and if we think specifically about the school climate protest started by Greta, but when you look at the chart on the right-hand side there, it shows really that everybody does care. It doesn't matter if your brand or space is not targeting young audiences. Everybody across different generations, socio-demographic classes and region wants to see a more sustainable society. And what do we mean when we say connectivity? Well, we mean how people travel. And from our research, 55% of people are going to change the way in which they travel. And just under 3/4 of office workers see their future as flexible. People are moving on their own terms now, and they have done throughout the pandemic. We didn't stop travelling, but the way in which we travel has evolved. But connectivity also relates to digital connectivity, and if you're not in the same room as one another, you still need to remain connected. And finally, spaces need to be inclusive. They need to make people feel as though they belong to a community and that they're surrounded by diversity. Be that diversity in the people or diversity in the brands and offer available to them. We've seen community rise up in people's agendas post-COVID as we've moved from an idea of a me first to a we first society, embracing collective wellness over personal wellness. But don't think that you can hide from these fundamentals. If we want our future city to be a success, they need to be embedded into every decision that we make. And even if you don't think that your customers care, they do. Legislation will force change across each of these 3 principles. If they're not at the forefront of your customers' minds, they will be in legislation.
Okay, so what does this mean for our city of the future? Well, Charlotte and I are about to talk to you through our city through the 4 lenses of working, shopping, living and socialising. Let's start with how the world of work has been reshaped and how it should look going forward. We've got our city centre, our central business district, and this is typically where we used to think of as our place of work, and for many of us it's where we spent the predominant parts of our week. 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, all in the same place, 12 hours, leaving the place that we chose to live to the place our employer decided that we needed to be. But then, of course, the world changed. But before I go into the detail, I just want to do some myth busting because there's been a lot of noise in the media about the future of office and the future of the workspace as a whole. So we've seen multiple headlines on how work has transformed and we don't actually need physical space anymore to work together. We've heard multiple accounts of people preferring to stay at home, with many saying that they'd never come back to the office unless they were made to. And if they were made to, they'd probably look to leave to go for somewhere else, given it's the Great Resignation at the moment. We've been monitoring the return to work since 2020, and this is not what we've seen. So yes, we've seen behaviour change quite significantly, but it's not in the way that you'd think. So what have we seen happen to office worker movement? Well, what we're looking at here is a chart showing movement in worker-specific locations. So that's worker hubs where pre-pandemic would have seen really high daytime footfall from workers. So it's all based against a pre-COVID view, so 100 being a really normal level of footfall. So anything above the 100 means higher footfall, anything lower means lower footfall. What you can immediately see is those drop-offs in footfall as a direct response to the lockdowns that we endured in 2020 and 2021. For many of these, of course, they were mandatory and actually offices had to shut, so people dropped off. You can then see how recovery towards normal levels of footfall began during 2021. You can see it creep up. We then get a hit with the Omicron, which was a minor blip at the end of 2021 as a direct result of Plan B. Also, people were being cautious in the run-up to Christmas. But then when we look at where we were at in 2022, we actually see that we're at 68% of pre-COVID levels of footfall, which, to flip that stat round, means that footfall is minus 32% on where it was pre-COVID, which isn't actually that drastic. Of course, this stat will vary location by location. But I think what's really important here is the actual behaviour of those workers when they do visit the office. We definitely think there's a future for the office, it just needs to evolve to suit those new worker habits. Using London as an example here, and this is consistent across the country, what we've seen is that 10 million square foot of office space has moved to hybrid working contracts, and that's a monumental shift, and it'd be completely naive to think that things are going to go back to normal because they're probably not going to. But for example, with hybrid working now an option for many, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday are the days that most people decide to come into the office. So what this means is that office space area needs to be prepared for greater peaks and troughs in visitation. When workers now do visit their place of work, their average spend is up by 15%. So if you imagine coming to the office is now more of a novelty, often more exciting brands than what you've got at home, and people are more inclined to socialise with their colleagues, people are going for sit-down lunches rather than picking up a sandwich and eating it at their desk, or going for a drink on a Thursday if you like your colleagues enough to be doing that. What this means is that whilst frequency is down, actually over the course of a week, the worker on average spends about the same as they did pre-pandemic, which is interesting. Fundamentally though, we can't underestimate the value of having a central place for people to come and share ideas together. So in the US, video conferencing has been a thing for a lot longer than it has here. And that didn't stop places like Silicon Valley from emerging. why are they all in the same place, all these big tech firms? Well, because there's inherent value in physically clustering together to share talent, innovation and ideas. I think another really important point to note here is that life stage is going to have a massive impact on whether you're going to go into the office or not. So for younger workers that are looking for mentorship, for guidance, might be more inclined to socialise, and also probably don't have very good home setups, coming to the office is going to be much more appealing compared to someone with young children at home and maybe a longer commute. So you really need to understand what your workforce looks like to know what the footfall is going to be like in the future. I've got a friend who said that she didn't move to London to do Teams calls in her bedroom, and I think that captures the sentiment perfectly. Okay, so do you ever feel like you're sitting slightly too close to your colleagues? Well, since the 1970s, you're probably sitting much closer to them. Here we have a chart showing average square foot per employee, so how much space each worker has in their office and how that's changed since the 1970s. You can see how quickly it's declined, and there's a really interesting mechanism behind why this has happened. So office rent for companies is dictated by how many workers there are in the office. So naturally, if an organisation needs to save some pounds, they might squeeze their workers into a smaller space. Eventually, it becomes clear to the landlord that actually there's the same amount of workers in the building, but they're paying less rent. So rent goes up. And if you can imagine this cycle going on and on and on over the course of 40 years, you can see how this trend has evolved. But what happens if you break that link and actually if workers can choose whether they want to come into the office or not? Well, then workers need to want to come into the office. And if we're going to collaborate, share ideas and socialise, the fabric of the office needs to change to support this new behaviour. So this means an end to the rows on rows of desks and dividers and more meeting space and breakout rooms. So new office developments are doing really smart things, like making sure that the canteen in the building can't sit everyone at once, to give people a general nudge to go out and engage with the surrounding offer. That's just one example, but I think the point here is that a rethink, and a quite radical rethink of how you can encourage your workers to engage in the area is really, really crucial. But let's not forget about the people that don't use the office. So according to the ONS, 26% of workers worked from home in 2020. So that was double 2019, so we did see a huge rise. And it didn't include those people that were on furlough. But what you've got to remember is that a lot of people that were on furlough were people that actually worked in physical space, so they had to be on furlough. So what I'm trying to get to is that the largest proportion of the workforce actually had to go to their place of work, and post-pandemic, it's returned to business as usual for them. So whilst most of the narrative that we hear about is office work primarily, 63% of our workforce in the UK are not desk-based in jobs like these, and this isn't an exhaustive list. So the point being here, if you're in a location where there are schools, there are GPs, there are construction sites, forms of transport, logistics hubs, I could keep going on. These big changes in terms of the way that workers are engaging with their place of work are not going to affect you. So finally, just to go back to our future city, so how do we reshape the fabric of it to respond to these changes? Well, we have lots of different types of places that people work, and the strategy needs to be different between these places. For city centres, who've no doubt experienced the greatest declines in footfall, it's about making sure that the office itself has flexible uses, so it accommodates this higher spend, these more sociable trips to the office, and be prepared for lower frequency inevitably as well. For local neighbourhoods, which are now enjoying this increased daytime activity, it's about accommodating that new home worker. So for example, coffee shops, convenient everyday brands, independent brands, and also flexi working spaces are going to work really, really well here to accommodate this new type of behaviour. And then finally, as I just mentioned, there are places completely unaffected by this change. The impact isn't equal, and understanding how this varies for your particular market is really, really key.
So where we choose to spend our time and money when shopping has altered. And it would be naive for me to be standing here at a retail briefing in front of you, talking about shopping and not to mention online, when it boomed so much during the last year. This was driven in part by necessity, but also down to changing consumer demands. Back in June 2020, we said that in 5 years' time, we will not be talking about channel. And to be honest, we still hope for such a time. Place and brand play such an important part in purchase decisions that it's difficult to intrinsically pull them apart. And understanding the value of the store and how the physical and the digital interact will become even more important as the channels merge in our future view of the city. So understanding consumers, their needs and their desires in different destinations is crucial to success. Within CACI, you can see the different functions the space is fulfilling. Out of town, you have big ticket shopping, everyday functional shopping, and even further out in the malls and outlets that you can't see on the screen, you have big brand shopping and big day out missions. Within the local neighbourhoods, it's all about what brands can do to capture the everyday shopping, capture the spend of what consumers are willing to travel no more than 15 minutes for. It's about convenience, particularly when working from home and on the weekend. And finally, it's about championing local independent brands. We've all learnt to love our local community throughout the last few years. City centres are where customers seek experience. They're there for big days out, experiencing brands and new concepts. But on the other side of it, they're also there for hyperconvenience, particularly for those who are living, working or transiting through the city. And interestingly, as well as demographic and generational splits in the missions, throughout our survey we also found some interesting gender divides. For example, women reported to feel more comfortable making high-value purchases out of town than men. Now this could point to some differences in the feeling of safety within space. So when we talk about success in our future city, it all comes back to these three fundamentals discussed at the start of the presentation. The city needs to be connected. Consumers are keen on both convenience but also on digital. So in your space, reflect the reason shoppers are there and what they want. Secondly, it needs to be sustainable. And I'm not just talking about environmental sustainability, it is also about enjoying the mix on the high street, the retail park or the city centre. And recognising that people want a blend of brands. Long-term sustainability of the brand means it needs to involve the local community. And finally, inclusivity. Reflect the local demographic in the products you stock and adapt formats to suit different local markets. I'm now going to show you some case studies reflecting on each of the above 3 points. So Zara are doing an excellent job of combining customers' desires for both digital and convenience at their store in one new change in the City of London. The newly opened store features store mode, which integrates online and in-store and allows guests to purchase items displayed in store digitally through their app. They can then collect those items within the store within half an hour. Customers can also book fitting rooms or use an automated pickup point to collect their online orders. Within the grocery world, Amazon have launched their Amazon Fresh store with just walk-out technology, serving the hyper-convenient mission and integrating new technology to ensure the seamless experience. And finally, it would be remiss for me not to mention the rapid delivery companies, springing up across towns and cities, once again serving that hyper-convenience mission with their grocery in minutes. But how sustainable is this desire for hyperconvenience? The market has no doubt been disrupted by these rapid delivery services, but how environmentally sustainable can it be to have things so on demand? And thinking economically, despite these companies' high valuations, will they actually make a profit? So getting the balance right will be crucial for success in the future city. Creating the reason to visit with services to the community is something not only big operators are thinking about. The images here represent images from grocery stores, including local regional co-ops. And they, for example, are flexing their store formats to include key reasons for shoppers to visit them within their local neighbourhood. Examples include local library areas, flexible working space, outside areas and community gardens. In the competitive market, and with so many stores overspaced, we also need to be providing reasons to visit. Show you understand your local area by selecting partnership brands most suited to customers and their needs. If we take Asda, for example, they have partnerships with B&Q, Decathlon and Claire's, whilst M&S have announced one with the Early Learning Centre. And finally, Nike Unite. They've launched a great new store format with one opening in Foss Park West to reflect and celebrate the local area. The store aims to create new in and out of store experiences with a focus on the local community. The products will be locally curated and the store has been built to help locals connect more closely with sport. You can see that the signage in the stores reflects the local areas, and even the changing rooms have maps of the neighbourhood, ensuring that customers feel included within the space. Now, as you would have heard a number of times at similar events as these, there's no denying that centres are overspaced, with secondary centres and high streets most impacted. We've lost a number of big brands over the last 2 years, and so it's now time to re-prioritise on 2 key areas before we can re-engage. The first one, what locations are actually prime now? And the second, looking at who are your customers and what are their needs. So the next section will now address these 2 areas. So towns and cities across the UK have seen shifts in the idea of prime space. Once consistently on-pitch and prime locations are now being challenged. New opportunities are arising in locations brands wouldn't have considered previously, and this has been driven by consumer demand. On the other side of the spectrum, we've had forced closures of some of the big retail brands on the high street, and it's been well documented in the press as kind of the dying of town centres, but this has actually caused shifts. But what if some of these retail units are being occupied by offices or by leisure brands? How will that alter the fabric of the location and how consumers behave within it? So let's take Plymouth as an example. This map here uses mobile location data, and the darker blue hexagons represent a higher level of footfall. Pre-closure, you can see that the Debenhams created an area of higher footfall around the store on the Royal Parade. But when we look after it closed, you can see a real shift in the footfall away from the store to now creating more of a thoroughfare along the Royal Parade. So let's hit replay and I'll do that again. The second area to consider is who your customers are and what are their needs. If we look at channel preferences, you can see that actually needs vary quite substantially across the 2 generations. And if we focus in specifically on Gen Z, our survey revealed some really interesting interplay between different channels. It showed that Gen Zs who said that they prefer browsing in-store are almost as likely to then walk out and purchase online. So it brings it back to my point at the start of the presentation, that in 5 years' time, we will not be talking about channel. They are so intrinsically linked in purchasing decisions, we need to understand the value of the store in its wider purpose. But it isn't just about channel for Gen Z, it's actually far more complex. They are a generation defined as the always-on consumer. They care about brand authenticity, corporate responsibility, and also a brand's social influence. So to wrap up the shopping section, here are my 5 key points to consider if you're opening up in CACI. First and foremost, flex the look and feel of your store for the community and the mission that you are serving. Be true to your brand and your ethics. Create exciting environments for the interplay between the channels. Consider new locations and once off-pitch areas. And always be thinking about the next generation of consumers.
Now let's talk about where we live in the future of our city. In CACI, your residents need to live somewhere, but where do they want to live? So they might want to live in the city, in a penthouse, or an old town in the local neighbourhood, or maybe on the peripheries of suburbia. Point is, they'll have a dream home in their head dependent on what life stage they're in, what their personal preferences are. But most of us don't end up living in our dream home. So intention is much bolder than actuality, and without wanting to be too cynical when I say that, we did see this in our consumer data. So when we asked people that were intending to move what kind of move they wanted to make, more people wanted to go urban to rural, so a lot more people, twice as many people wanted to move to the countryside. We then asked people what moves they'd actually done in the last 18 months, and actually we saw twice the amount of people had moved from the countryside to the city. So I think this tells us something really interesting on what we dream for ourselves versus what we actually end up doing when we face the practicality of life and all the commitments that we have. Anecdotally, you'd have heard all about this big flight away from the cities. And yes, in 2020, we did see a lot of young urban renters moving in with parents mainly to withstand the lockdowns. But people did flood back to the cities. And we've got some data to prove that. So 50% of people actually move within 2 miles of their original location. Whether that's down to affordability, family ties, familiarity, I'll talk about that in a session, but people tend to stay put for the most part. In 2021, the rental market finally stabilised across the UK. In some places it continued to decline, but actually in London what we saw was a 27% growth. And this was those young renters moving back to the cities. This recovery actually ended up outshining what we saw in 2019, so completely pre-pandemic. We had 50,000 more lets agreed in London than in 2019. These movements were from young urban professionals, and the build to rent market is the most booming in the UK at the moment. So let's talk about that for a second. Is renting everyone's dream situation? It's definitely not mine. Most people would prefer to own their homes outright, and if personal preference was the only thing that we had to consider, we'd probably be talking about the boom of the first-time buyers market, but we're not, and we're navigating through some really turbulent economic times. Pandemic aside, and where that left us, we're facing some significant newer economic challenges, and they're going to impact every single home in the country. So we're going to see energy bill rises, national insurance go up, and reports of an 8% inflation this year. And with daily updates on our news cycles, it's quite hard to get away from the fact that these things are going to happen. We asked consumers how aware they were of what was going on and how it would impact their spending, if so. We immediately see a very, very stark nervousness amongst the British consumer, and this is going to impact spending across the board. I think what we can expect is, in the medium term, really conservative spending, as we hold tight and see kind of how they actually impact our daily income. And reflective of the news coverage, we saw energy bills, which were the thing that people are most nervous about at the moment. That was consistent across regions. However, we do know that the impact of the price changes will not be consistent across regions. The cost of things varies enormously on a national scale, and these variations are really important to understand if you're going to be able to create a city that your residents can actually afford to live in. So North Wales and Merseyside, for example, are experiencing the highest energy bill rate rises in the country, and London is going to experience the lowest from the most recent reports. Here we have a map, and I'm sure you've seen very similar examples of these maps before. Show disposable income by region, and in typical form, the South East and London hold most of the money in the country. But where that disposable income goes after that varies quite significantly too. So here we then show expenses by region, and I've highlighted the West Midlands in pink, and the other white circles represent the other regions. So what we're trying to show here is that, for example, childcare is amongst the highest in the country in the West Midlands, but for example, the cost of travel to work or water are amongst the lowest. So actually, there are really significant discrepancies in how much different regions are paying on different things. With all of this in mind, coming back to where our residents in our city choose to live, we asked people, actually, what are your key drivers in terms of choosing where to live? And what we found, first of all, is that practicality has a really big part to play in this decision-making process. So we can only live where we can afford, so it's not a surprise that affordability ends up being the biggest determinant. Where there is actually housing available was number 2, and I think that shows that we're still living in the midst of a housing crisis. And then finally, being near transport is also really important. So we still feel the need to be able to move around a lot. And then we have our emotional drivers. So being near the people that we know, our friends, our family, the people that we have connections with, and also feeling a level of connection to the city itself, it reflecting you as a person. And I think this really reinforces the reason why these core pillars of sustainability, inclusivity and connectivity are really important. We come back to our city and we need to decide what the right places are for all of our inhabitants. Well, city centres, first of all, need to cater for that growing demand for space, and how redundant spaces need to now be converted into homes. Naturally, younger people are going to be more inclined to want to live in cities, but partly driving that is having a good, strong, critical mass of bars, restaurants, shops, fitness, etc., services and transport links to other cities. Vibrancy and diversity are also really, really important in city centres, and this should be encouraged. And I think another really important point here is that gentrification must not gut these spaces of what makes them unique, and everyone should feel like they belong in a city centre. Local neighbourhoods, either on the inner or outer peripheries of our city, are where the majority of our residents are going to live. Many office workers who now no longer go in 5 days a week are going to be spending a lot of their time here. So, as I mentioned in the working section, there needs to be flexible working space to support them, as well as the essential brands, but also public services like GPs, schools, etc. And then finally, we've got the suburbs and out-of-town residences. So these are likely to draw family groups that need a bit more space. What's important is that the transport links to the city are good, but also that road access, because car usage is going to be higher here, that road access to out-of-town locations like retail parks, malls, outlets are also strong so that you can continue to capture those people. Understanding who your residents is really, really important.
Now that we've established where and how our people live, work and shop in our future city, let's address what they want to do when they want to have fun. After 2 years of not being able to socialise, human connection has now become more important than ever. And as discussed at the start of the presentation, there really is a desire to be part of a community. This may be an online or a physical community, but it plays out through our leisure time. But let's not kid ourselves. We are a nation who still loves to go to the pub. If we look at transactional spend data over the last 2 years, we can see how well pub sales have recovered across our tracker brands. The peak of sales represents Christmas 2019, just before the pandemic hit. We then see sales drop off an absolute cliff due to COVID, but they recovered strongly in August 2020 with Eat Out to help out. But it appears we don't need Eat Out to help out to encourage us back to the pub. You can see that sales then remain consistently strong after the easing from 2021. And it's fair to say that other traditional leisure pursuits still stand too. This chart here is taken from our survey data, and it demonstrates the spread across the generations in their preferences towards different leisure activities. So we take going for a coffee as an example. 41% of boomers ranked it as their number one activity in a town or city centre, and that compared to 15% for Gen Z. But eating out, going for drinks and then going to the cinema all then follow as remaining important to consumers in our future city. Interestingly, if we draw upon millennials, we can see that going for a coffee is far less important to them and that other activities start to become more important. And when we think about other activities in the context of this survey, they include things such as competitive socialising, whether that's mini golf, darts or even axe throwing, as well as wellbeing trips such as visits to the spa. So on the note of health and wellbeing, we've also seen huge rises in the popularity of self-care and fitness. Outdoor boot camps have boomed, and operators such as One Rebel Spin classes have been expanding to cater for the new hybrid working market, with their immersive classes, which apparently promise to make spin fun. But it's not just our research suggesting this. If you look at changes in the ONS basket of goods for this year, you'll see that donuts and suits are out as they reflect the old world, while sports bras and meat alternative sausages are in. Again, really reflecting the shifts in consumer spending and behaviours over the last few years and indicating where the future opportunities lie. Out with the old and in with the new also plays out in where leisure operators are considering when they think about their future selves, the locations they operate in and the formats too. Much like with retail, the shifts in behaviours seen around living and working have caused big shifts in how people socialise. So if we take Pret as an example, they were once known as a very city centre dominated brand, targeting workers, shoppers and students with food to go. But over the last few months, we've seen a marked shift in their location strategy, with sites due to open around more suburban areas for the changing shape of the city. Locations such as Twickenham, Stoke Newington and Brentwood all stand out. We've also seen a move into petrol forecourt locations with a site opening in Southgate too. And it's not just where to open that needs to be considered for the future city. Formats also play an important role across the leisure sector too. If we take Itsu, for example, and compare two of their sites, one of the first in Victoria versus St Albans, which is a very newly opened one, they're clearly very different locations, serving different consumers and different missions. And what you'll notice from the newly opened St Albans site is how different the format is, with seating to cater for the dine-in mission versus the grab-and-go format of Victoria. Now, these changes in formats also take shape in the combining of the retail and leisure experiences. Since August 2020, a legislation amendment has allowed leisure operators to open on former retail sites on the UK High Street. And this has caused a shift in the mix of our high streets for the better. But the consumer doesn't need to differentiate between their shopping and their leisure time. The two can and often are combined into one. So if you take for example, Barry's Bootcamp, who are an upmarket gym provider, they have opened up at the new Flannels flagship within the Liverpool One Centre. Fred Perry have announced a residency with the 100 Club on Oxford Street, putting on a set of shows showcasing up-and-coming bands as well as more established bands too, bringing people together that are all into the same sorts of music, again, all with the aim of creating that experience. And the fashion brand Lazy Oaf are also doing some interesting events. For example, life drawing with cider, but also hosting queer club nights, showcasing young DJs and pushing brand engagement to a wider audience, again through the socialising lens. With all the functions of the future city we've discussed today, none of it would be feasible without a future-looking urban logistics network. Our towns and cities depend on reliable and efficient logistics to deliver food, clothes, documents, medicines, buildings and construction materials for residents, workers and visitors 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Catering for the changes in demand across both retail and leisure is key for the future city to be able to thrive in a sustainable manner, to serve the people who both live and work within the area. So socialising is not just about where we go, it's about where we don't go and how we facilitate that. Most of us probably haven't realised how many dark stores, dark kitchens and urban logistics hubs are opening up within our local neighbourhoods. How many restaurants are now considering how to fulfil online orders, and how brands are working to ensure seamless delivery and returns infrastructure too. But it is crucial when designing our future city. So to summarise, new formats, new locations and the urban logistics of it all are key when thinking about socialising in the city. As we've shown, each area of the city serves a different mission when it comes to how we spend our leisure time, and the future city needs to reflect this.
Okay, so let's go back to CACI one more time. So I know we've just bombarded you with loads of data and statistics, but believe it or not, this was actually a really slimmed down version of the deck that we wanted to show you. In classic analyst form, we cut everything every which way and we could have, gone on and on and on. But our objective when we came here today was to identify the different elements that the city must be. And when we've gone through this, we've demonstrated that actually it is possible to weave these future principles of sustainability, inclusivity and connectivity through every aspect of placemaking to make your space better and fundamentally more desirable. So CACI as a business is setting up ourselves in both our owner and occupier teams to help you succeed with the help of our data and our consultancy. It'd be great to hear from you. We have plenty more to share with you. And if you'd like to learn more about anything that we've shown you today, please get in touch. Our fundamental goal today is to leave you thinking about how to enhance the spaces that you own, manage and operate within, to future-proof them essentially, and to position them to connect with your customer and maximise your return. So thank you so much for listening today.